topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, joining from Dallas. That's my home base. If we've not met yet and you don't know me, I'm a management consultant, organizational logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Elise Cortez and Associates help companies to articulate their purpose and build inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose to turn those companies from a flatline EKG to a vibrant workforce. Today, people are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, grow into their full potential, and are committed to stay and help deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. Now let's get into today's program. With us are the authors of Real-Time Leadership, Finding Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High, which we'll be talking about on the program today. David Noble is a top executive coach with more than 20 years of global experience as a top executive in advising CEOs, their teams, and major investors on leadership and strategy. He has served as a senior advisor to both Egon Zehnder and Oliver Wyman for the past decade, working with many of their largest clients. Carol Kauffman is also with us. She's known internationally as a leader in the field of coaching. She works extensively with global CEOs and their teams, also serving as an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, visiting professor at Henley Business School, University of Reading, UK, and a senior leadership advisor at Egon Zehnder. They're both calling in today from London, where it's about 10 o'clock at night, pretty late for them. So thanks for tuning in again and joining us on Working on Purpose. Welcome, David and Carol.
Thanks, Elise. Great to be here.
Guys have had a full day and then you're hanging out with me. It's pretty fantastic.
Couldn't think of a better way to end the day.
Well, let's just show off this beautiful thing that you created. This is really gorgeous work. As I told you before we got on air, guys, hats off to really, really, really significant work. I like to say that writing a book, of any kind of book, let alone a good book, is actually harder than making a baby and bringing a baby into the world. So really, kudos.
Well, you two probably know more about that than I do. Yes, I could imagine. I could imagine it so.
Right. So but I always like to know, it's really something. I don't have a co-authored book out yet. Mine are all just me. So I want to start by just talking about where this book came from and why did you two come together to write it?
David, did you want to start?
I think you got the best story, and then I'll follow up.
Well, there's a couple of reasons really. We started the book when we were really thinking about, the executives that we'd worked with that had really made a lot of changes, and trying to look at what is it that we did that happened, and what is it that separates some of the great leaders from not so great. And one of the things that we found was that, there's sort of a wonderful quote by Viktor Frankl about creating space. And what we really looked at is all of our frameworks that had we used. It was like 100 of them. And we sort of culled them down fewer and fewer and fewer to truly try to get a handle on what is it that was so useful to our leaders. And then we put it all into 4 buckets that we'll talk about.
Yeah, and so for me, it was all of those reasons. Like, we really want to reach both existing leaders as well as aspiring leaders. And what we've actually found is the book is quite helpful to those who actually aren't in a leadership role, who are individual contributors, as well as just employing it at home. So it's actually turned out to be a lot more versatile than we thought. But I wrote the book for an additional reason. So back in my very first job, which was quite some time ago, I was writing a speech for the CEO. and I quoted that we are living through unprecedented volatility and uncertainty. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
that was, yeah, that was back then. And, it just continues to escalate and the trajectory doesn't look like it's going to stop. So what I wanted to do was to write with Carol the book about how do you deal with that? Like, how do you step into the face of continuous uncertainty and volatility? So that was why I wrote it.
Okay. Well, as you heard in my introduction, since we haven't met before, coming on air, I mean, really what I'm out to do is help people really live to their very fullest potential. We have one precious life. We do not know when the exit ramp is coming. And I think most of us really want to make the best impact we possibly can. I don't think anybody goes through life going, gee, I hope nobody notices that I'm here. I'm going to fly under the radar as far as I can, right? I think they want to matter, right? And so what I really appreciate about your book and what you're doing in the world is, from what I can tell in your book, and I know that you say this is for all levels, but you're both coaching gurus. You guys have worked with extraordinary people around the world who have really big jobs and they have tall orders. And you're really helping to steward their journey while also bringing up the rest of us along the way. And I really admire that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we love coaching, both of us.
I appreciate here, you say here in your book, you say extraordinary leaders are clear on the contribution they want to make in their lives. Meaning is what matters most to you. And purpose is how you act to fulfill it. Looking at everything you say and do through the vantage point of your purpose will drive what you actually say and do as both a leader and a person. I really align with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole nature of your podcast, and we very much agree with purpose and meaning as being a fundamental driver. Because when we look at the basic thing that we discovered is that we find that good leaders try to make the most of every moment in this crazy world, whether it's making a split-second decision, whether it's working on something really important this fiscal quarter, or whether it's working towards a lifetime goal. And the way they do that is that they rely on deep pattern recognition that's built over many years of experience. So when they see A happen and when they see B happen, then they instinctively know that C is the right thing to do. And that's fine in a normal operating environment, but we haven't been in one of those for a very long time. So even in a normal operating environment, if you just repeat your reflexes over and over again, you're not learning anything, you're not growing as a leader. But in particular, when you're facing something novel, like a new type of crisis, which we're facing all the time, whether it's supply chain or inflation or armed conflict in Ukraine or workplace issues or whatever, or even a new like 10x kind of business opportunity, which is bigger than scale and scope than you've ever seen before, your reflexes can actually hurt you. So our starting point is actually to look at things through the vantage point of making every moment count is by doing something that is relative to your purpose. So that's your highest and best use. So by doing that, you are going to make the most of every moment. And then you need to kind of overcome your reflexes, which Carol can talk about.
Mm-hmm. The one thing, sort of one of the overarching quote that we think of for this book really comes from Viktor Frankl. And, he was in the, concentration camp for 3 years and came out a better person. And then when he looked at the people who thrived and who were crushed, and then he summed that up in man's search for meaning, and obviously having purpose being a core piece of that. But the one quote we really love is that when he says, between every stimulus and response, there is a space. Right. And in that space lies our freedom and our capacity to choose. And so first step is to try and create that space. And I think there's a lot of people who know how to do that and work on that. But we then go further to, what do you do when you find that space? So you have that space and you're overcoming your reflexes. What are some frameworks and guides for you? And in that is where our entire sort of frameworks are, and our MOVE model, and, which to be mindful alert, options generator, get your vantage point, and engage and effect change. And also, as we talk about these things, for each person to find what is the one or two kind of small adjustments that really unlock them. So if we go on, there's a lot of material, but what you should do is just pay attention to what sings to you. And that's probably because that's aligned to your values and your purpose. And where you'll be able to make a difference.
Well, I am hopelessly aligned with this. You heard me introduce myself as an organizational logotherapist, so you probably know that means that I'm schooled in Viktor Frankl's school, and I have a diplomate in logotherapy. So yes,
Wow.
I'm right there with you, my dear. We are singing from the same sheet of music. So, and that really brings me to one of the other points that I really wanted to echo. Your book is, as I mentioned, I really respect just how much you packed into your book. There's something there for everyone, and that's just no small feat. And another thing that you do that I think really situates, and certainly again I align with, is that you do talk about how a career and a legacy isn't just about the external measures that you've accomplished. That's part of it. So when we think about big leaders, we often do think about what did they actually do? Did they free the slaves? That kind of a thing. But then you really go on to talk about living must include being in alignment with your deepest internal qualities, your strengths, and your values, which in turn drive the caliber of your interpersonal relationships. And of course, that's really so smack down at the field that I play in, right? So if you could say just a bit more about why that whole well-rounded package is so important.
So we believe that leaders have to literally be three-dimensional. So if you think about one or two-dimensional leaders, they're all over the place. So those are the leaders who are very results-oriented and always drive an outcome, but possibly at the expense of their people.
Right.
Or they are great servant leaders who really care about unlocking potential, but they find it difficult to hold people accountable because they care so much about them and are so enmeshed with them. Or you've got subject matter experts or individual contributors who are brilliant, but they find it difficult to relate to other humans. So each of those are just one or two-dimensional leaders. And we believe that to be a good leader or a great leader, you have to have all three dimensions. So for us, it's being crystal clear on what is it that you want or need to get done. That's the external dimension, the goals. The second is, while you're pursuing those goals, who do you want to be as a person? So do you want to be a person who's got perspective, who's kind, who's patient, who's listening, or some other type of leader? And then the third dimension is, once you know what you want to get done, who you need to be as a leader or want to be as a leader, then how must you relate to others to basically unlock their potential so you can achieve goals together and leverage your impact as a leader and drive change at scale?
Just a little bit of work to do to pull all that off, yeah?
Yeah, well,
a little bit.
But it can be as simple as, if you're a complete results-oriented leader, you are never going to lose that. That is just so embedded as part of you. So you just say, look, let's take the second dimension, the internal dimension. Let's just put it a little bit ahead. So we're going to think about people first before you think about your external goal. And that's more of a micro behavior. It's a mindset shift. But if you can start to think about, wait, who do I want to be first? And then what do I want to do? That's a small shift that could be a game changer.
That's a very nice distinction, David. Thank you. Did you want to say something else, Carol?
Yeah, well, I think where this came from is when year, sort of New Year's resolution time, and I was sort of thinking about that, and we sort of just do that again and again. So what am I going to do this year? And I think this was 2018 or 17, and I went, ugh, and I thought, no, wait, it's not what do I want to do, it's who do I want to be, and then really very specifically, who do I want to be right now? So, for example, think of today, perhaps you're on a line and the person in front of you is taking forever and you're about to maybe say something. Well, then, who do you want to be, like, right now? And one of the people that we worked with, she's a very well-known CEO, and it was really quite beautiful because we talked to her about that. And this is what it did with her. She said at the end of that day, she was on her, maybe, this is in the middle of COVID, she's on maybe her 16th Zoom call. Yeah. And she's just like, I just want to be out of here. And as she was starting the call, instead of just sort of like gearing up, for her like game face, she said, well, who do I want to be right now? And then she realized, like, wait a minute, the least important Zoom call of my day is the most important of theirs. Yes. And maybe their week and maybe their month, as the CEO of a global company. And, when we talk about how do you do this, it's sort of we wrote an article here called The Split Second Question That Changes Your Life. And these things don't take a lot of time, as David was saying, these micro behaviors. So literally, you're in a situation and you feel yourself about to get annoyed or someone's let you down. Who do I want to be right now? And it can be a very quick course correction.
That's a great way to bring us right into the material and start applying it as well. I want to finish this first segment here with this, what you open with your chapter 8, which is called Unlock Talent Around You. You open with this quote. And the quote is, "A good leader gets great results from great people. A great leader gets great results from ordinary people." Now that's
Right.
absolutely something that's attributed, by the way, to Charles O'Reilly from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. That
Yes.
is smack down the aisle of what something like Bob Chapman would say. Do you know who Bob Chapman is?
Mm-hmm.
I don't
CEO.
know Bob Chapman.
He's the CEO of Gary Waymiller. He's been on my show before. He's given me testimonies to 3 of my books. And that is absolutely what he would say. And I really think that speaks to, wow, that's something for us to aspire for. Anybody could lead, great people to greatness, but leading, just basic people to greatness, that's something else. And that's what you guys are working on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also it sort of gets people, it keeps them from letting themselves off the hook. Like,
Yes.
if only I had a better team,
Right.
if only that. And then I'll often say that quote then. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
the quote, it's like,
think-
and so it's like, how do you kind of embody that it's possible?
For us, this is all rooted in, the notion that good leaders have to do all the right things. So there's a lot of hygiene around. We need to set goals. We need to make sure roles are clear. We need to set accountabilities. We need to drive outcomes, and that's okay. And then good leaders also tend to unleash great people. They don't necessarily have to do a lot. That's oversimplifying, but they unleash them. And great leaders take good people and they realize that everybody has human potential and they find a way to unlock that potential in each person. So that's just a very, very different mindset around development that makes you great.
And again, I totally align. Great way to send us into our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We run the year with David Noble and Carol Kauffman, who are the authors of Real-Time Leadership, Finding Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High. We've been talking a bit about just the importance of leadership and the opportunity and the promise that it holds. After the break, we're going to get into their MOVE model and how it actually shows up in leadership practice. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to the program. Before we get back in with our guest, I want to actually share some fun news with you. I'm about to launch the Purpose and Joy Elevation Tour, Igniting Essential Energy to Mobilize Your Best. This is a collaboration with Joyily, an organization that teaches mindful practices to build a happy, healthy, resilient world, and my firm, Elise Cortez and Associates. And together, we are visiting 33 cities across the United States, starting in Dallas in March and finishing in Virginia Beach in October, to find our tribe and build a community of people who seek to elevate their lives and businesses by cultivating meaning, purpose, and joy. You can find a list of cities, dates, and planned events at gusto-now.com, and then go to the events tab. Very excited to bring this to your own backyard. Find your city, mark your calendar, and register for an event. See you there. Now, if you're just joining the program today, my guests are executive coaching and author duo team, David Noble and Carol Kauffman. They have coached some of the best leaders in the world and are bringing you their expertise in their book and here on air with me. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Really do consider it an amazing privilege that you are sharing what you all know in a book, plus here, for, as you say, for anyone who is really aspiring on the trail for leadership. So I drink up every word of this. And if you could see my preparation, I have actually 17 pages of typed notes from the book.
Wow.
Because I'm a researcher as well at heart, so I take this stuff very seriously.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you've already moved me. How's that?
Excellent.
So I want to dive into your MOVE model and spend this segment really talking about it and bringing it to life. Carol, you gave the outline of it here, but I want, if we can, to go ahead and just work through each of those key letters and what they mean and kind of how they show up, how they show up and how you try to coach people to them. Starting with M, who's going first?
I'll start with that. So M for us stands for being mindfully alert. And you might ask, to what? So mindful alertness is about being able to notice what's happening outside you in your operating environment, as well as what's happening inside you without judgment and just accepting it for what it is. And then being able to act in the interest of what your goals are. So for us, mindful alertness is concentration and noticing, but it's like the alertness or the attention of an athlete, where it's almost like you can slow down time. Of course, we know we can't slow down time, but it's that kind of alertness that where you're really in the zone that we're looking for. And we have different ways that you can actually cultivate that. So once you manage to get in that zone and we can help you step into that zone, then you need to be alert. For us, it's about what you need to get done. So that's the 3 dimensions of leadership. That's what do you want to get done? Who do you want to be, and how do you want to relate? And that's easier said than done, because we often sort of assume implicitly or explicitly that we're crystal clear on our goals, but we're not always. So one example is I'm going to go into that EXCO meeting and I'm going to drive approval for this big capital expenditure program that I've got. It's like, okay, well, you're crystal clear on that goal, but is that the right goal? So just even asking yourself, wait a minute, am I exaggerating or discounting threats or opportunities? Am I missing the point? You can sort of pull yourself up and have a more optimal goal, which might be, in this case, maybe that is the goal, but maybe the goal is, hey, I need to make sure that everyone has a voice around the table and that we can come to an even better conclusion with that input. So I'll come next time. So it's a very different goal. So being clear on your goals is important. Then the second thing is like being clear on who you want to be. And that's easier said than done too, because a lot of us we're implicitly very good people, but we don't have a language to articulate what we're great at, what our character strengths are, and the things that we want to cultivate on our growth edge to be even better leaders. So we give you a little bit of a starter kit around, well, here's the values. Here's different values around wisdom or transcendence or temperance or humanity that really matter. And like you pick the ones that you think reflect you and that you want to work on. And then the last dimension is how do you relate to others? So shorthand for this is a lot of us are all about the golden rule. So I'm going to treat you the way that I want to be treated. Oh, well, that's great. But what if I'm an extrovert and you're an introvert? Right. And I'm giving you a pep speech and you're cringing and want to get as far away from me as possible. So for us, it's more about the platinum rule, which is like, I will relate to you the way you want and need to be related to. And that requires like reading the room, reading the moment, reading the person, and being agile. So those for us, those 3 things, what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? How do you want to relate? That's the what. That's being very clear on your goals. Being able to name your goals is very important in terms of actually taking the first step on achieving them.
Just one thing that I wanted to pepper into that really stuck with me from your book, and this really speaks to the importance of just self-awareness, right? You have an example in your book of the gentleman that was interviewing with the board for a role, and the feedback was that he came back too flat or whatever, and he said, well, when I get under pressure or whatever, I go deep and I kind of go whatever he said, flat or whatever, and it came across as automaton. And so one of the things I appreciate about what you said in your book is that, we all have instincts that can cause us to overreact or underreact, but being aware of them and then being able to flex to and away from, or as you say, leaning back and etc. It's just so critical. And so I thought that this first piece of the acronym, the M, that mindful alertness, is so critical. I find that so many leaders, so much of us are just not clear at all as to how we're showing up in the world and how we're impacting other people.
And that's, again, Carol and I are all about, because change is so hard. Of course, we want you to go through the whole model, but there's a lot involved there. But there are parts of the model that could be game changers, just like small parts, just like, oh, I actually need to ask myself, what's my objective going into this interaction, right? Something as simple as that. We often just sort of charge ahead, but that can be a game changer in and of itself. So yeah, small moves can create great outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So did you want to say something else, Carol, before we move on to the O?
Yes, just that basically everything we talk about is also evidence-based, and there's a lot of research that simply pausing and naming something is very powerful, kind of neurologically, and and that's the power of it. And it's, again, as we go through the MOVE, the M is like that's a way to create space, and as we move to O, that's like another way, like even more space, and through each one. Eventually we want to be able to like live in that space between stimulus and response and have sort of freedom. So I can take my cue from you and go from that into the options generator.
Awesome.
And, again, some of this started way back in the Gallup organization when I heard Rick Snyder give a talk where he was talking about way power, and that we know about willpower and grid, and there's, Angela Duckworth's work, etc. But what Rick and Shane really talked about was the importance of way power. And in terms of some of the research, it's very, very robust that, you need to have, at least 4 ways to move forward. And David was talking earlier about overcoming our reflexes. So our main reflexes are, fight, flight, freeze, and befriend. And we sort of translate these into these 4 stances of how are you going to respond. So the reflex, like, do you go in or do you run away? But we think of them as stances you can take. And again, if you think of an athlete, on the tennis court, you plant your legs one way if it's a forehand shot, another way if it's backhand, another way so you've got like instantaneously read and stance. So our 4 stances are, lean in, very actively engage, lean back, sort of data and analyze, lean with, sort of nurturance, or don't lean at all. And so, one, super simple example is, okay, so let's say, you were kind of Matt at that meeting, or you're giving a presentation, and someone that matters to you rolls their eyes and clearly like, ugh, like really?
Right.
Okay, so if you did that, let's say you just did that, I was talking and I caught you going like, ugh, really, Carol? I could lean in and go, it's, hey, like, what was that about? I could engage with that conflict and do something even constructive with it, but like, what's going on here? Okay. Or I could lean back and just sort of be observing it, maybe rationalize it in my mind, and I don't really want to engage with that. And then I can sort of put it in context and move on. Then there's lean with, which was like, hey, I just saw that. Are you okay? What did I say something that maybe put you off? Because I want to take care of you and the relationship. And then don't lean is you can like sneer or whatever, and it just doesn't trigger me. Like, I'm on purpose. I'm doing what I'm doing. It's fine that you had that reaction, and I'm okay. And so that's sort of like lean bin. And then what's really important is to know what your default is, and then be able to do all of these. Now, one of the chapters David really wrote was really looking at this in a business context and looking and putting a kind of business strategy headset to this, because we've given an example of how it works in the moment with relating, but it's also a stance about how you might run a merger and acquisition or something.
Intense and powerful. I don't know that I appreciate that last bit about mapping over the befriend piece. That's really interesting, Carol. That's another one of those beautiful snippets that I got that is distinguishing in your work. Okay, so that brings us to the V, right? Validate your vantage point.
Okay. Give me a time orientation. I can do this in 30 seconds or 3 hours. What would you like?
Well, let's definitely not do 3 hours. Let's do 30 seconds.
Okay. V for vantage point. Most business failures are actually due to overconfidence. So you want to be able to know what it is you're seeing and clearly assess it. And David referred to this earlier, like, are you minimizing a threat? Are you over-indexing on a threat?
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of how do you do that? How do you know if you're seeing clearly? You know, nearsighted, farsighted, rose-colored glasses, charcoal-colored glasses. You know, do you need to be high def or grainy? Will that do? Because you only have so much in your attention budget. And then, of course, there's blind spots and then unconscious bias. What are the things that can be distorting your vantage point? And what's really important there is connecting with others so that, you know, if someone says, gee, I don't know that that's so great, you really ignore them at your peril. You know, the whole kind of, you know, CEO, CFO dynamic, you know, it's like risk and no, let's go ahead. Well, you really have to listen to each other to get a complete vantage point.
Awesome. Okay. Now that brings us then to the last one, engage and affect change. You know, bring it home, right? Okay.
Yep. So that's where the model all comes together. So if you think about M, that's the goal setting. This is what I want to get done, who I want to be, how I want to relate. Options generator is about, okay, how do I actually unlock that and find 4 ways to win across each of those dimensions of leadership? Vantage point is like, let's just do a quick check and figure out what's reality here before we act. And then E is, how do you engage and affect change at scale? And that can be whether you're a leader driving leverage through your entire organization, or it can be as an individual contributor who's trying to influence. And that has 2 elements. It's all about sending leadership signals at that point in time. So the first leadership signal is really articulating, like, what's the minimum set of words that I can use to decentralize a mission? So, and that comes from military theory, which we translate over into leader's intent, which generalizes. And that's about, like, where are we going and why are we going there? What's the purpose, to your point? What are the signposts along the way to know that we're winning? What are the general methods that we can do, the options basically that are permissible? I can't tell you which way to win because there's so many different ways to win, but I can tell you some things are allowable and some things aren't. So for example, this year we can't do any acquisitions, so we've got to have organic growth. How do we do it within organic growth? And then the V is like, what are our constraints? So what is our budget? What's our time frame? What are the behaviors we have to live by in terms of our culture? And so those things together form leader's intent. And that's what you sort of start with. And you sort of put a stake in the ground based on what you know and say, here's my leader's intent. And that's your leadership signal. So then what you want to do is make sure, oh, how much of that signal that I sent was actually received? So then you get feedback. You send out a bunch of sensors and you get a lot of feedback about, well, that was right, that was wrong, you missed the point here, we need to adjust here. And then you also adjust it in future as you learn new things. So version 1 is your leader's intent, but 2 months from now, when you learn a whole bunch of new things, you adjust that version a little bit and it's version 1.1 and 1.2 and 1.3, right. And you iterate as you go forward. So that's how you kind of pull together everything through leadership signals.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully explained. And let's let our listeners and viewers chew on that while we grab our last break here. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with David Noble and Carol Kauffman. They are the authors of Real-Time Leadership, Finding Your Winning Moves When the Stakes Are High. We've been talking about their MOVE model. After the break, we're going to get into just a few pieces of the content that I thought really stood out and maybe a story as to how this stuff all works. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. If you're just joining today, my guests are the executive coaching and author duo of David Noble and Carol Kauffman. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this last bit here, I just wanted to showcase a few of the things that I thought, also stood out. You already talked about way power, which I thought was a really interesting concept. But then you have this idea of the 5 C's. Can you say a little something about these 5 C's?
Yes, absolutely. This really comes from the work of Richard Schwartz, who created something called the Internal Family Systems Model. And that is basically taking a family systems approach, but looking inside yourself. And one of the ways he talks about it is how do you access your full and your wisest self? And how to, get the sense of, okay, well, when am I in myself, in my core self? What should I look at? And so what he has the 8, but we trimmed it down to 5. The 5 C's, which is, again, am I calm, clear, curious, compassionate, and confident? And we all sort of tend to be somewhat better at some of these, right. And how to develop them. So to kind of have the awareness of, what is your sort of superpower? What is your kryptonite? So for me, it's calm. That if I'm in a place of calm, I can sort of do anything. But if I'm not in a place of calm, I can barely read, or that. So it's like, how do I work on that? And so I recently had a very tough interaction that I needed to have with a business partner, not David, that I really thought we were about to crash. And I was so distressed before the call that basically, I'd wanted to replace her. And basically she found an email that she'd been blind copied on accidentally saying so. And so she's furious and I'm about to have the conversation. And it's kind of hard to have a conversation when you're actually part of the bad guy. It's really great when you've got the moral high ground, like you go. But, I didn't. I was sneaky. And I dreaded it. And so what I did, and I just really encourage someone watching or being here to do this. So before it, I was like up in the night dreading this conversation in the morning. I'd gotten some really howling texts. And so what I did is I just wrote down the 5 C's. I thought, okay, so what can I do to be calm? So you downshift, breathe. How can I be aware of what's going to get me off calm? And then how can I get back? Okay, then clear. So under high stress, like David and I are like the opposite in so many ways. Man, oh man, David is like so friggin' clear. And no matter what happens, he is always clear. And it's a challenge when I'm not. But so I just wrote down what are the things that, I need to keep in mind. And then curious. It's like, okay, so when I get this barrage, how can I ask one more question? Yeah. How can I be curious and then compassionate, walk over the bridge to her side and really see the issue, and then courage, like don't lose my story along the way. Mm-hmm. And what happened, for example, is she was upset or whatever and was going, and then she paused and I just said, well, like, what else do you have to share? Like I did asked another.
Nice.
And then in another time she was saying, well, we just should end the conversation. I'm just being defensive. I say, well, let's just put defensiveness to the side and let's just say you're talking. So tell me more. And it was really remarkable because I watched this transformation in front of my eyes where, she was not doing something. And so finally it just said, well, listen, you're not doing this. I don't believe you want to do it. So why don't you hire someone to work for you to do this for us? And, but if I hadn't really done the 5 C's, and it's really a very powerful way to create space. And David uses it in his coaching in some very creative ways.
Yeah, I think for us, the 5 C's is just so wonderful because it both helps you create space and it also can help you step into optimal performance, which is what the MOVE model is all about. So just a quick example, I was working with CEO of a private equity portfolio company. And I only had 15 minutes with him before we were about to go into an exco meeting. So I asked him to go through this simple exercise, and I just said, okay, scale of 1 to 10, how calm are you right now? 10 is super calm. 10, I'm always calm. So, okay. Second question, how clear is your thinking? 10 is super clear, 1 is really fuzzy. 10, I'm always clear. How confident are you right now? Scale of 1 to 10. 10 is really confident. I'm super confident.
25.
How curious are you? Right? Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, see where we're going. So my last question was, so how compassionate are you right now? First towards yourself, and then second towards the people that we're going to be going into the room with. And there was a 10-second silence, which seemed like forever. And then he just said, yeah, I'm low on that. So I said, okay, that's fine. That's great. There's no judgment. Can you imagine a time or visualize a time when you were a 10 out of 10? And he had a picture of his son on the desk, and he said, yes, I can. Let's go into the meeting. So in the meeting, the CFO was announcing that he was resigning for personal reasons because his father was at the end of his life, and he wanted to spend all of his time taking care of him until the end. And in the middle of that announcement, he broke down and started weeping uncontrollably. And no one in that room knew what to do. So this time the silence was for 5 seconds. And the CEO got up, went around the table, sat down next to him, put his arm around him and said, it's okay, we've got you. It's going to be okay. And in that moment, that was a game-changing moment for everybody in that room and for the CEO's leadership. And when we came out of the room, he said, I never would have thought of that. And that was exactly the right thing to do. So that's, again, that area where Carol and I are always looking for those small shifts that could be game changers. And that was a game changer. So really special.
Really beautifully illustrated too. And also just further illustrates what Carol said about you. Are very clear, by the way, David. You are very clear in your thinking and your speech. Just right there. Okay, you're welcome. Another concept that I think is really interesting is your 10 out of 10 concept. Let's hear about that.
Sure. Where that comes from originally is the work of Richard Boyatzis and intentional change theory, but it's sort of intentional change theory made simple. So you start out, it's a coach by numbers model, very simple. And you start out with, what do you want to work on and why? So tell me something. If you were going to work on something, what would it be? So what's a development area for you?
For me? What isn't? There's so many. And let's see. I would say trimming down my to-do list and doing what I want to talk about next is doing things that only I can do.
Okay. So what we would do with this model is, I'm not going to make you do it, but I'd say, okay, why does that matter to you? And then you would tell me. And then I would say, so if you were a 10 out of 10, I'm really trimming it down and doing what only you could do. What would that look like? And I'd make you spell that out, like paint the picture and paint it vividly. What would you be doing? Someone watching you, what would they be seeing? What would you be saying to yourself, etc. And then the question I'd say is, on that scale of 1 to 10, what are you now? So what would you say you are if you're going to give yourself a number?
Doing what only I can do. I am 6.25.
Okay, 6.25. So then what I would say next is, so what are you doing right that you're not a 5.5 or a 6.0? And then keep asking you again and again, what are you doing right? What are you doing right? What are you doing right? With that same energy of a debrief of a disaster, like, why didn't you call the police? But it'd be like, what else are you doing right? And only then go, what can you do over the next 8 weeks to get from a 6.25 to a 6.75? Just what it is. But the whole idea of the 1 to 10 is very powerful because it's basically a very simple way to put positive psychology theory into simple action, based also on Boyatzis and other people.
Beautiful. And I got my own little coaching in this too. Thanks for that, Carol. So speaking of that, I did want to talk next a little bit more about this notion here of, you say to engage and affect change at scale, focus on doing only what you can do. So send the highest quality signals by not getting distracted by issues that can best be attended to by others, which is what happens for me sometimes. So if you could say just a bit more about that particular aspect of your coaching and how you help people achieve that. You did that with me already, Carol, but I feel like there's more you could say.
Look, this is one of my favorites because, the orientation of the book is all about how do you make the most of every moment in the most effective possible way. And this comes from a person that we collaborate with. He's a retired 4-star general named Chuck Jacoby. And he often is asked to coach 1-star generals coming into a new job. And the derivation of general is from generalist. So by the time you step into a job of general, by definition, you don't fully have command of the full role. It's something new to you. So some generals can focus on the stuff that they already like to do or that they really know a lot about. Some will delegate completely, some will micromanage completely, but the optimal approach is do what only you can do. So in most jobs that are properly structured, you have to have the right support and everything. There are 2 or 3 major decisions that you have to make. Maybe it's about strategy, maybe it's about hiring and terminating. Whatever it is, there's only 2 to 3 decisions that you absolutely need to make. And the rest are for others. Doesn't mean you don't have input into those or that you have discussions around it, but you don't have to decide those things. Now, if your team is not in the shape or condition to do that, if you don't have the right skill sets or the right dynamics, one of the things that only you can do is to fix that. And that's the first thing that you should be doing as a leader. So it's like, get the priorities right, get that team in place as soon as possible. So we just thought that was just an incredibly powerful kind of slogan, which we've been applying to everything that we do.
Mm-hmm. That's gorgeous. That was a great laugh, Carol. Did you want to add anything else?
No.
Okay, great. Well, we're getting close to the hour, and I have 2 more questions for you. I'm very, very intrigued. This is very interesting to me. You advise in your book to take special care with peer relationships, which will be the most crucial to your success. Gotta hear why that's so.
Okay, so I read an article in Leadership Quarterly years ago, which talked about how to predict who's going to derail. And it turns out that peers can predict who's going to derail much more accurately than your boss or the people who are your direct reports, because there's sort of no code. You kind of know how you're supposed to be with your boss, how you're supposed to be with your reports, but not with your peers. And it's really kind of like the higher up you go, the more likely it is that either you will become the CEO and people will work for you, or one of your peers will be. And very often, like David and I worked with this one guy who the coaching was remarkable. In the beginning, I guess 8 of his peers said if he was made the CEO, they would leave.
Wow.
Okay, so we started working, and 18 months later, he was given the top job, and every single person said that they wanted to work for him. The only one who didn't said, I don't want to work for him because I wanted the job, but if I can't have it, I'd want him to. Because your peers really are going to be the ones who have a lot of say-so when it's time for you to rise to the next level. But it's also, that's where your true self kind of comes out more.
Mm-hmm. That's really beautifully explained, very powerfully elicited. So here we are. We've come to the end of the show already. You both know probably at this point that this show is listened to by people around the world who really do care about creating workplaces where people can really come to work, give their best, become their best, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave them with?
I guess for me, it's like we want the message of make the most of every moment. And one of the ways you can do that is look through the lens of purpose. Because if you're spending all of your time focused on your purpose, that's the highest and best use you can have. The second element is, for us, we always want to challenge you and challenge ourselves to keep doing better and better. So for us, the difference between a great leader, which is a real-time leader, and an extraordinary leader is that you do real-time all the time. Now, none of us will ever achieve that, but we should keep trying and get closer and closer to that.
Beautiful. David. Carol?
I think it all comes to transcending ego and remembering that, what is purpose? Purpose is being attached to something greater than yourself. And if you read the book, David and I both describe our own purpose statements. And I think that is really key. How can you really stay connected to what it is you're supposed to be doing, why you came to this planet, and then really be able to kind of free yourself up from ego. And that is what you can do when you make that space. I mean, what is it that you're making space for? What is it that you're pushing away? And that is this sort of self-involvement.
Powerful way to close. David and Carol, I'm really happy to know you. I really, as I told you, I enjoyed it. Got so much out of your book. Happy to share it with my listeners and viewers. Thank you for being on Working on Purpose, especially at 10, now 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
Thank you, Elise. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Listeners, viewers, if you want to learn more about David Noble, Carol Kauffman, their work or their book, you can start by visiting either view-advisors.com. Let me spell that for you. VIEW-advisors.com. Or another site is rtlinstitute.com. Either way, you can find them. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We are on air with Dr. Jack Wiley talking about his latest book, The Employee-Centric Manager, 8 Keys to People Management Effectiveness. We had a robust discussion about helping frontline managers up their game to increase their team's productivity, fulfillment, and commitment to the organization. Awesome conversation. Next week, we'll be on the air with Faisal Hogue talking about his new book, Lift, Fostering the Leader in you amid revolutionary global change. See you there. And remember that work is an integral and important part of our lives and can be one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.